We are at 10 and we're going to start on the dot. Hello for those who are watching now and for those who will watch the replay. I am Pauline Joseph and I am delighted today to have a conversation about fraud, which is a weird thing to say, but I just said it. Because e-commerce is so important in the Caribbean. It has always been important, but even more important because of COVID-19 and the effects of it. And today we are joined by the folks at Kount, and of course we have Christopher from FAC. Just so everybody knows, if this is the first time you're watching, I am your spokesperson, so definitely slide into the comments even if it's broadcast, we check it and we will respond to your comments. But also I will be multitasking, so my head may look down, but that's not mean I'm not listening, because I'm hosting as well as managing the event on your behalf, right? So let's start off with Chris. Who are you?
Who am I? What a question.
Deep question.
Yeah, this is a deep question. So I'm Chris Burns. I'm the CEO of First Atlantic Commerce. So if you've watched this before, and hopefully more and more people are understanding who First Atlantic Commerce is, but we are an e-commerce payment gateway company that we're based out of Bermuda. We cover pretty much the whole of the English-speaking Caribbean, and then we're also getting into markets like Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. So we have, from a gateway level, probably the most extensive network in terms of banks and acquirers and merchants within the Caribbean right now. So we've been operating in that space for 23 years, and we are in a unique position to connect to all the different banks to help support online payments for merchants within the Caribbean. But we also service Central America very heavily as well right now.
So Jamie, same question to you.
Another deep question. Hi everybody, this is Jamie Kinshella. I am the partner business manager at Kount. We are a fraud mitigation solution, but so much more, which we'll get into today. But First Atlantic Commerce is one of our many partners who offers our solution. I am the liaison basically between Kount and FAC and manages that business relationship.
Great. And what about you, Dan?
So my name is Dan Beardall, and I oversee the onboarding of strategic partnerships here at Kount. So working with payment processors, gateways, banks, acquirers globally that would like to offer our fraud protection platform to their clients. Very much looking forward to the discussion today. And Pauline, you mentioned it really well. Fraud is a topic that we are passionate about. It's very near and dear to our hearts, but also realize that it can represent significant challenges for a lot of companies in different aspects globally. So looking forward to chatting more about it.
Great. So, Christopher, can you give us some sort of idea of where that fits into the FAC plugin? Because based on our previous sessions, we discussed, getting the merchant ID from the bank. We discussed ensuring that there's a somewhat of a business plan to ensure that you have an idea of what's going on, and coming to you to say, okay, these are the next steps. So where does this fit in terms of safety in your business?
So we had, as I mentioned, been operating for a number of years, and we'd used all the tools available from the card associations like Visa, MasterCard to help combat online fraud, whether it was your address verification or CVV, which is the 3 digits on the back of the card, or 3D Secure, also known as Verified by Visa, MasterCard Secure Code. And we were growing to an extent and dealing with much bigger clients as well, who were saying, okay, well, what else have you got? And we were seeing fraud, and this is the sort of fraud that we're seeing online. And fraudsters were becoming much more sophisticated, and they don't play by any rules at all. So it's quite hard to keep up with them. And so we thought about building our own anti-fraud platform for about a second, and then realized what was involved and how complicated it is. So we went out and spoke to a number of different companies, and we chose Kount for a number of reasons, and we liked the fact that the technology was all theirs. It was all proprietary to the Kount system. The team was fantastic. The customer service that we get from Kount is amazing. And we liked their story and where they came from. And I'm sure Jamie and Dan will do a better job in telling that than I will. But and one of the reasons we chose as well is it's kind of a software as a service to us, so we can plug in our gateway into the Kount system. So we integrated into the Kount platform. So when a merchant has had their merchant account approved and they come to us and we talk to them about the different options that we have as gateway platform, whether they want to do recurring payments or use tokenization or 3D Secure, we also talk to them about Kount. And we offer different ways to integrate into the gateway. So, and if they choose to add Kount, they just simply choose that integration method into our gateway. And there's some other elements to that in terms of some code that gets embedded into the payment page of the merchant, which again, these guys will do a much better job talking through than I will. But it doesn't complicate the integration per se, and whereas the back end of Kount is super complicated and really impressive, the interface that the merchant sees is very easy to use and very intuitive. And that's another reason why we picked Kount as well, because it was something that we felt our merchant base could really get to grips with, whether you're a smaller client or you're a much bigger sort of multi-billion-dollar listed type public company. So
okay,
that's really where they fit in for us.
So I want to bring it all the way back as this word called fraud, right? And it has evolved as a word because we are in a space of technology. And when we think about fraud, it's usually, especially when it comes to identity fraud, you picture somebody with like a hoodie and they're like typing away, they're about to get my information. But when it comes to introducing your business in e-commerce and basically exposing yourself in such a way that you're getting customers online, but also exposing yourself to this fraud. So I would like you guys, somebody pick up this question in Kount, which is, what is fraud in the e-commerce world? What does that mean?
So I'd like to jump in and just kind of speak to that, Pauline, and what you mentioned is really important, because the way that e-commerce has evolved and fraud therefore has evolved is quite impressive. I mean, when we started back in 2007, and Chris, you kind of mentioned this high level, but when we started our business, it wasn't because there were a bunch of people sitting around a table trying to figure out what type of company they wanted to start. We have a sister company that was dealing with some massive amounts of fraud. And so it was in response to that, saying, hey, this is a problem and we have to address this. And so we developed some of those initial technologies, Chris, that you mentioned that are proprietary to Kount to combat those problems specifically. And it worked really well that only then we decided to build a product and a platform around it and see if we could help other merchants that were dealing with some of the same challenges as well. So what we were doing back in 2007, a lot of those things are still kind of apparent today and applicable to what other merchants are dealing with, but it has changed and evolved so much that now it's not just that guy in a hoodie in his mom's basement. It's very, very educated and very smart PhD level mathematicians that are trying to game the system and take identities and steal money. So very much obviously a criminal act. But then there's also use cases of fraud where it's not so quote unquote criminal. There's friendly fraud, there's return fraud. There's so many unique applications where I think when people hear the word fraud, they automatically go to the negative. Somebody's trying to steal my money, somebody's trying to steal my account. For merchants, it's somebody's trying to game the system, use fake credit cards, steal goods, etc., which is a big piece of it. But there's also an opportunity cost with fraud as well. If you are trying to mitigate fraud and either have an in-house solution or a third-party solution that you're leveraging, you're trying to identify and stop fraud. But there's also kind of some crossover there potentially where you are stopping good buyer personas as well. So it's finding that balance of stopping the bad, but also preserving our business and really identifying and leveraging good data and good business intelligence to know who our good buyer personas are, so that we're not missing out on those as well.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of work.
Luckily, we've kind of streamlined the process. Having really good technology helps, but having great people like Jamie as part of our team, who works very closely with our partners and works very closely with merchants to kind of help them understand how fraud is impacting their business and how we can both overcome it together.
Great. So you've been in the business for quite some time. Kount has been there. I would like to know what has been the trends that you're seeing, that you're exposed to, that the folks out there who are, joining this e-commerce world for the first time should be aware of.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of the natural evolution of e-commerce and the internet, different methods of payment. What we've seen kind of at a higher level, obviously a lot of the focus initially was on e-commerce card not present transactions. That's just kind of naturally where a lot of partners and a lot of merchants were experiencing challenges, to today where it's not only e-commerce transactions, there's account-based fraud as well, where fraudsters are hacking into accounts. They're leveraging all different types of data once they get in to an account, whether it's in a streaming account, a bank account, so on and so forth. So what we're looking at now is every single step of a customer's digital journey, from an account creation, an account login, to payments, to account changes and adding or removing information there as well. So anywhere there's a digital passing of information is where a fraudster can potentially intercept. So we want to make sure that we're protecting at every single stage of that. So protecting against fraudulent account creation or fraudulent account logins, to e-commerce transactions, and so on and so forth. So just kind of that natural evolution of e-commerce and the internet and how we interact online. But then there's also other factors that can contribute to that as well, like what we're experiencing now with COVID and how it's forcing companies to go more online just because of the natural state of things in the world around us. And so we've seen a major spike in online business, especially with streaming companies, digital gaming, and just kind of general e-commerce retail, where folks can't get out and travel and shop and do things that they normally would. And so that has adjusted the way that we protect our partners and merchants against some of those emerging threats. And if they're new to e-commerce and conducting business online, then obviously it's kind of new ground for them. They want to make sure that they're protecting themselves against some of the challenges that lie therein. So those are some of the things that we're seeing just with the pandemic and everything that's going on, and some of those external factors that can play a part of that. Even so much that as here in the States, there were stimulus checks that were being sent out. There was a whole new world of use cases where fraudsters were trying to steal identities and leverage identities to be able to intercept stimulus checks. And so that was something that kind of on the fly, we noticed and had to be able to adjust really quickly to make sure that we were protecting against that.
Wow. So, Chris, when it comes to setting up your e-commerce, website and platform, where does Kount fit in with this setup? Is it even something that, as a business owner, that they see, or is it behind the scenes? It's just a stamp guarantee on your website. How does that work?
So when we get merchants coming to us that have been approved by one of the banks that we're connected with, we will generally have a kickoff integration call. So we'll have somebody from the business side and the technical side of the merchant, because sometimes what the business wants and what the technical side wants, they don't necessarily meet, or they have really sort of talked about before they actually sort of embark on this. So, and at that point, we'll discuss all the different options in terms of what they want from us as a service provider. And if they choose to go with Kount, and we hope they do, because we want all our merchants to be protected. So nobody wants to be that next big name in the news in terms of data breaches or big fraud cases. So at that point, we'll talk them through the options and how that works with Kount. And at that point as well, they're going to their software developer is going to choose that integration method into us. And then when it comes to picking the rules, and there are some preset rules that can be set up in the Kount system based on the merchant's industry type. So whether they're telco or travel or standard retail or restaurant, and the team at FAC will walk through that training with the merchant on how to set up rules and how to access the Kount system. So there is a whole back office system that merchants can log into and view their rule sets and see if a transaction's been rejected, why it's been rejected, which rules it triggered. And there's lots of other functionality within there. I mean, I think last time I looked, there was this Google Maps functionality within there as well, where you can actually see if somebody signed for like a product. You can actually use the tool to zoom in and see exactly where that, at street level of Google Maps, to see exactly where that package was delivered to, which is really cool. And I think some of our clients have used it from a marketing perspective as well, because there's so much data within the Kount system that you can see, if you're running a particular special on your website, you can see, because it tracks the IP address of everybody that's coming into your site. You can see where that's been most effective. So there's other benefits within there as well. And we have other clients that are sort of bigger and maybe a bit more sophisticated on the anti-fraud side, that want to have direct access to a technical account manager account, because they have a special fraud team, and they want to do manual reviews of certain transactions as well. So they have that option as well. So our team is trained up on it, but then if you really want to get deep into it, you can sign up with Kount directly for access to a technical account manager as well.
Well, my ears pricked up when I heard marketing. I'm there. I'm sold. Data. I'm there. For the Caribbean, it is, I guess, a good thing and a bad thing depending on who's looking at it. We're pretty small in a lot of things in terms of being scalable and the size compared to, let's say, North America, right? So if you have a small business, does it make sense, heading over to Kount.com to say, okay, I want to explore this, or what would be your suggestion based on the size of the business?
Dan, I'll start with this, but then you can jump in. Yeah, we have a giant global footprint. So even though we are based in North America, almost 40% of our transactions are actually outside of the US. So we work with very, very small companies all the way up to enterprise and giant credit card companies. And so no matter what the size your business is, you still get to utilize all of that data from our entire network. Dan, you might have more to add on to that.
Yeah, so if we're looking at the, I guess the ability to leverage a robust fraud solution without necessarily having to be a fraud expert or have a team of fraud analysts or folks that understand and know how to configure and protect against fraud, we've designed this platform where we partner with companies like FAC to be able to facilitate that process or the ability to leverage a robust fraud solution without exactly having the know-how to manage it. And so a lot of our partners have taken that and are able to offer that to their clients and to their merchants in a way that allows them to be protected against fraud without, again, necessarily having the knowledge of a fraud analyst and to be able to do that while having an effective solution. So whether, as Jamie said, whether it's a very small business all the way up to very large enterprise, fraudsters are no respecter of persons. They don't care if it's a small business or a massive enterprise. Anywhere there's an opportunity, they're going to try and take advantage of it. So we want to make sure that even if it's a small entity all the way up to, you know, a very large organization, that they're protected. And the way that we go about doing it in terms of configuration of rules and things of that nature, working very closely with our partners to be able to offer that. The way we go about that might be a little bit different, but the end result is the same. We want to reduce chargebacks. We want to preserve good buyer personas and drive conversions, which is going to help companies grow, no matter if they're small or large.
So this question is for Chris. We started this series having a conversation about websites because that's also a huge gap in the Caribbean. And, you know, you have a lot of businesses that are going to start searching for web development, templates. What would be your suggestion? Because, you know, just adopting a template and sticking up to a domain, although it may be an e-commerce ready template, what would be your suggestion for when it comes to that business owner starting from scratch?
Yeah, and I think, you know, it kind of leads on nicely to what Jamie and Dan were just saying. So, you know, we get this conversation a lot, and we see people say, "Well, I don't have a fraud problem," and I said, "Well, nobody really has a fraud problem until it happens," and it's one of these things where, you know, it's kind of, you know, similar to insurance, I guess, in some ways, that if you don't have insurance and you do have an accident, or you could be driving for 30 years and never had an accident. But if you do have one and you don't have insurance, that's going to be a really costly experience for you. And the same happens with online fraud. So it's not just the cost of chargebacks that the bank may charge you for each chargeback that's coming in. You know, it's loss of funds, loss of goods sold, loss of reputation, but also you could lose your merchant account because if your chargeback ratio goes up over, say, 2%, the bank may just cancel your merchant account altogether, and then you're stuck. And then trying to get another merchant account after you've been terminated by a bank because your chargebacks are too high is incredibly difficult. And if you do find one, the rates are going to be really high. So what I would suggest to that first time, that first time business is put everything in place at the start, so you don't run into those issues in the future. So if even if they are a smaller merchant, the value of the system is the same to you, because if you are a small client, you can't afford to lose any revenue. From that perspective, you don't have any way to absorb that if you're a smaller merchant. So if you're not protecting yourself up front, and you do have that, these fraud issues, that's going to hit you almost harder than if you're a larger company and you have the ability to absorb that from a cash flow perspective. So yeah, if you're buying the templates, we have plugins, for example, that for different shopping carts, and those plugins do support Kount as part of that. So we do recommend that people look at those options, because in the long run, you are going to be protecting yourself in a way that you would be protecting yourself if you had a physical store. We talked about this before. If you're online, just because you're online does suddenly mean that everything is secure. You have a gateway partner in the bank. You have to have several tools to help you protect yourself from online fraud, just as you would as in a brick and mortar business, by locking the doors or security cameras or bars on the window, or securing the cash that you deposit to the bank. So just because you're going online and it's virtual doesn't mean you shouldn't be as vigilant as you would be in a physical store.
So as a small business owner, what I just heard is add this line item to your expenses is basically what you're telling me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
We would certainly recommend it. Obviously, people will choose a direction that makes sense for them. but we do recommend it. You want to have that extra layer of protection to make sure that people aren't going to take advantage of your business. So you see, fraud goes to the path of least resistance, right? So in North America, a lot of people are using a lot of anti-fraud systems, and the EMV was more prevalent than it was, say, in the Caribbean for a while, and fraudsters find those paths, right? They say, okay, well, this region isn't as well serviced from an anti-fraud perspective, so we're going to take our business down into that region. So our job is to help protect everybody as equally as if they were in a different region in the world.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people compare fraud protection to insurance. Everybody hates paying for insurance, and you don't like doing that unless you need insurance. And so it's one of those things where it's much better to be proactive about it and maybe a little preemptive, knowing that if you are expanding online, you're building out your e-commerce, or you're venturing into regions or geographies where you previously hadn't been, it's much better to be protected than to have to deal with some of the repercussions if you do get hit, because we tell people it's typically not a matter of if you're going to get hit, but when, if you're online, because these fraudsters, again, are very smart. They don't care who you are. They have one goal in mind. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Chris. That's an important point. And the other thing I was going to mention as well, just in terms of the overall approach and ultimately what we're trying to accomplish is business growth. And obviously fraud is a contributing factor in terms of costs. And so, yes, identifying and stopping that, but then again, and something that Jamie mentioned in terms of machine learning and other technologies that we leverage globally, merchants are able to have an effective solution right out of the gate because there's so much data out there. And data really is the important key here. And if we're looking at business intelligence and how can we better understand our consumers and our buyer personas, well, it comes down to data. So that business intelligence is key.
So can we break down, because I went to your site and you have solutions, different products, right? What would be sort of a basic level approach to fraud?
So I think in its simplest form, and we offer this through a lot of our partners, where it's more of a kind of a native or built-in fraud protection. It's nice because the merchants themselves don't necessarily have to go in and configure rules. It's all set up and controlled and managed by Kount and our partners, in this case FAC, where they can turn it on pretty immediately. It can be very effective. And I would say that model is probably the most common, just due to the nature of our partnerships and who they're working with and the needs of their merchants specifically. And again, in terms of the technology, we have two machine learning models. We have an unsupervised machine learning model, which is based on our global network of data, and then a supervised model, which learns more specifically to each merchant. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but it's important to mention that because from a real-time fraud analyst and fraud prevention perspective, the unsupervised machine learning with the network of data in determining identity trust is immediate. It's been training for 13 years. We have massive amounts of data that are being fed into that model, but then we can also fine-tune that specifically to merchants based on their unique data, the chargebacks that they're seeing, how they might be decisioning orders, so on and so forth. And so kind of at a basic level, standard, baked in, that's essentially what we're offering. But then, as Chris mentioned, if there are larger merchants that say, hey, we would benefit, yes, from kind of a baseline fraud protection, but we would like to go in and customize that a little bit further. We want to be able to access rules and configure that specifically to our unique business or the unique fraud challenges that we're having. So we realize it's never really a one size fits all. It might be a one size fits most, but there definitely has to be some customization because everybody has unique tolerances and thresholds when it comes to protecting themselves against fraud.
That's a great segue into Alejandro's question. He has submitted a question that asks, what's the benefits and differences between something like Kount and Visa 3DS?
That is a great question. And what we're seeing now globally, especially with like PSD2 across Europe, and one of the things that we have been positioning against with some of our European and global partners is how and when and if we need to use a step-up authentication like 3D Secure. And so we all know that if we're using PSD2 as the example, part of that requirement is having strong customer authentication. And so the way that we're positioned and the way that our partners are positioning Kount as part of their services for SCA is doing that fraud analysis, which allows them to have a manageable fraud rate that either increases exemptions, so that reduces the amount of step-up authentication that they have to do. But in the cases where it might be necessary, it's not an either or. Should we use Kount? Should we use 3DS? It's a workflow where they actually work together. So in a lot of cases, Kount is the initial fraud analysis, and we're being leveraged to, again, maintain the fraud rates so that we can maximize those exemptions. And based on certain scenarios, if a step-up authentication is required, then a transaction can be routed through 3DS. Let's say maybe there is a review process. We analyze the transaction. Part of our analysis is a score, a safety rating that we assign. So maybe the score falls within a gray area, and during the review, a call out to 3DS needs to be made, then that can happen. So it's part of the workflow. And we get that question a lot. Should we use a fraud solution or should we just go with 3DS? And our response is you can and should use them both.
So just to be clear with the 3DS, because I'm looking at it from a consumer, is that the, when you pay for something online, there's a page that come up now just to verify. So it's like a MasterCard or Visa verification?
Yep, so a step-up authentication. Yep.
Okay.
And so obviously one of the initial challenges with that, and maybe taking a step back in terms of we've mentioned identity trust a few times, and basically what that is assigning trust or friction to a certain scenario, whether it's an e-commerce transaction, an account creation, an account login attempt. At what point do we apply friction if we think this may potentially be fraud? Because we want to protect against it, but at the same time, we don't want to create friction for good consumers that are going to turn them away. And so it's finding that balance of if and when we apply that friction and how much. Because again, we don't want to create a bad user experience. We all know it's frustrating when you're putting in your information and you're being questioned about it. Is this really you? But if we all understood why that's happening, it's to protect us against fraudsters that are trying to get our information. And so it was challenging in its inception because it did create a lot of friction. 3DS 2.0 and 2.2 are designed to be have less friction. But anytime you have any sort of step-up authentication, obviously it's a little bit of friction because it's one more thing that you have to do.
I must admit, before this series, I was that consumer that was very upset. It's like, why do I have to keep doing these things? I put in my stuff, and now I'm just like, oh, that's why.
Yep. So if we can bypass the that step up by identifying and stopping fraud and maintaining those fraud rates, where again we've increased the exemptions. They call them TRA flags, where you can basically send it along with the TRA flag and not have to do a step-up authentication, obviously creates a better customer and user experience.
So in the Caribbean, we tend to think that we're separated from the world. We tend to believe that, that's happening out there on the TV. It's not gonna happen here. So can you share some context based on your experience with maybe some Caribbean partners, what you're seeing, and some advice based on those trends?
Yeah, and it probably goes back to Chris, your point, where I think sometimes and in some cases, and maybe it's more geography based as well, thinking that either we're immune to some of these challenges because they're more prevalent in the United States or across Europe or wherever it might be, or we're a smaller business, we don't really have a big footprint, we're probably not going to be impacted by this. A lot of what we do, a lot of the conversations that we have with our partners, with merchants, is not necessarily salesy around, hey, you should use our services. It's more educational, and we have a very large knowledge base. We produce a lot of content that is more educational in nature, just helping companies understand what fraud is and how it impacts businesses and why it's important to be able to identify it, and ways that you can have safeguards in place to protect against it. Because again, nobody is immune to it. If you have any sort of online footprint or are going to be online with e-commerce, you're susceptible to it. And so again, the idea and the positioning is, if this is where you're going to be with your business, you want to be protected against it, because for some companies, they can handle a few chargebacks. If they get hit with fraud, might not be a huge deal, but for others, it could be devastating. And we've seen this quite a bit with smaller companies. Some of our partners across Mexico and Central and South America are dealing with very small merchants that they can't afford to have a few chargebacks per month. It would be devastating for their business. And so investing in some sort of protection to ensure that, hey, we're not only going to identify and help you approve more orders, but we're going to protect against a handful of chargebacks that could be potentially devastating to your business.
So, Chris, when it comes to industries that you may see have more susceptibility to fraud, is there any industry that you'd like to point out in the Caribbean that we should be mindful of?
Yeah, absolutely. Travel being one of them, airlines, are often heavily hit with fraud. And there's a lot of people out there that have tried to figure out how to game the system in terms of, same day travel and, literally charging back the transaction as they're taking off type thing. And telcos, like prepaid, there's a lot of fraud around prepaid. Utilities as well, where, somebody will get a stolen card and then go pay off their utility bill and all their friends and family off the back of that as well. Anything with a high ticket value, generally, they receive. So jewelry, for example, is a big one. Digital goods, as Dan was saying, earlier, that's really where Kount was born out of. So because it's really hard to reclaim that digital good, right? So once you've approved the payment and delivered the goods, it's very hard to deal with that. So those are the biggest ones we've seen. And then what we food delivery actually is now relatively high on that list, now that we're living in this can't go to the restaurant type of world. So and to add to the point about 3D Secure, so most banks in the Caribbean mandate 3D Secure if you're going online. So we're still in version 1.0. They're talking sort of potentially back end of next year for 2.0 within the Caribbean. But I think it's important that people don't view 3D Secure as like sort of the silver bullet for protecting themselves online. A lot of people do make that mistake sometimes. Say, well, I've got 3D Secure, so I'm never going to have any chargebacks. Well, that's not it's not really the case. So nothing actually prevents a person from doing a chargeback. So what you're trying to do is protect yourself on the front end. And they're 3D secure in the Caribbean. There aren't a lot of issuers that support it. So you're probably not going to get that challenge question very often in the Caribbean. So really, we see 3D secure within the Caribbean being more of a reactionary tool, that you might get some liability shift on that transaction if it comes up as a fraudulent transaction, depending on the reason code on the chargeback. But where we see your Kount as being more beneficial is that it's going to stop those transactions that could result in a chargeback in the first place. So it's more this more proactive approach to protecting yourself. So you're not gonna have that hopefully that bad transaction in the first place that you have to worry about representing and all the rest of it. So it's important that people use multiple tools. Again, go back to this discussion about multiple tools to protect yourself online.
And for those of us who are sort of ignorant to all this chargeback scenario, let's put a scenario in front and say, okay, someone put a payment through and there's a chargeback. Where does Kount fit in? When does the actual business owner have to get involved? Is there some sort of something happening in the background where all the AI is working and you don't necessarily get a notification? Or is it, each step the business owner is notified? How does that work?
Yeah, so I can jump in on that. So we, again, going back to the idea that not all businesses are the same, not all preferences and thresholds are equal. And so depending on the business and who we're working with, usually dictates where we sit. If we're sitting in a pre-authorization state or a post-authorization state, I think in many cases, the idea, and Chris, you alluded to this, the idea is to identify and stop fraud on the front end as quickly as possible. That way we can reduce costs associated with pushing transactions through processing that are ultimately going to end up in a chargeback. And so identifying it right out of the gate, the way that our technology works is we're basically capturing, analyzing data, contextualizing that data with our identity trust network, providing a score, and this is all facilitated by our machine learning and our AI, which is very advanced, but as good as AI can be, it lacks one thing, which is common sense, which machines will never have, and that's kind of where the human component comes into it. They're really good at identifying trends and linking data, but looking at somebody's business and understanding what their business is and how it affects them plays into how we would decision those outcomes, either with rules or business policies and so on and so forth. And so what we're trying to do is tell a story, and we want to be able to provide this data and this story to the merchants so that they can understand how it's impacting their business, how they can adjust, how they can tweak maybe some rules or some business policies or work with our partner to do that. But the data is there. If they need to leverage that data for business improvement or better marketing or leveraging the data for chargeback representment, that story and that data is there for that business intelligence.
When it comes to the idea of fraud, kind of jump into what you said about business intelligence. I would like actually each of you to answer this question. What would be the number one piece of advice you give to a small business owner or an ICT director when it comes to setting up that environment to expect fraud?
Who's first?
Is it a hard question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, no, it's interesting the way you said it in terms of expecting the fraud, and you're right. You should expect some fraud, and you should plan for that. So in my opinion, it's it's using the right available tools. So yes, use 3D Secure, yes, do ABS checks, yes, do CVV, do all the standard practice in there, but then add the extra tools like Kount within there as well, because you don't know really what you're dealing with in terms of these fraudsters. I had the opportunity to speak with an Secret Service guy who was dealing with financial fraud, and the stories he told me were mind blowing in terms of just the level of sophistication and organization that these guys have. Some of them even have their own YouTube channels. Like it's odd. Like it's really difficult to deal with. So yeah, do plan for it and put in place all the right tools to help you deal with that, because chargebacks are, as I said before, like chargebacks, there's nothing you can do to actually stop somebody from physically going and performing a chargeback. But if you don't have the data to back it up, then you're going to lose those chargebacks in the representment.
My advice would be to talk to your consultants and experts, people like Chris at FAC, because every business need is completely different. To Dan's point earlier, there isn't a really one size fits all. Depending on each merchant's own risk thresholds, where they like to accept orders, and we can help customize that solution specific to that merchant need. So, utilizing somebody like FAC, Kount, just have a conversation so we can really dive into your own business needs. That would be my suggestion. Because it's such a large beast. And, to Chris's point, there are businesses out there that are teaching how to do fraud and how to go into each business. So
yeah, and that's a great point, Jamie, and I should have gone before you because you stole mine. But I think further to that point is, merchants are, again, what we've seen with some of the smaller entities is they obviously know their business well. They may not understand the world of fraud or how it impacts them yet. If it hasn't, if it has, then obviously they're dealing with it and learning very quickly. But what we've seen with smaller entities is they're looking to their payment processor, to their gateway, to their financial institution to kind of help with that. And so one of the main reasons why we have developed the partner platform that we have is that so merchants can take advantage of that. They can have that value without necessarily having the know-how or the expertise of how do we customize this for our business. We know it's going to be an issue for us, but how do we safeguard against it? And so leaning, to our partner and leveraging the expertise and the knowledge that we have, and trusting in that we have, your best business interest in mind. We're again very passionate about stopping fraudsters. I mean, it's a pride thing. We take great pride in shutting down fraudsters, and when we identify a fraud ring and putting a stop to it, I mean, it's almost emotional for us. I mean, we have a client where there was a situation where we were obviously identifying and stopping chargebacks, but leveraging the data and in some further investigations actually led to a human trafficking ring that we were able to put a stop to. And so it wasn't just, hey, these folks are stealing credit cards and they're making fraudulent transactions. These typically are larger rings linked to something else. And so there's a sense of pride in being able to stop that, but also when we see the impact that we can have on a small business and removing some of those challenges and those costs, which can be detrimental to their business, and really seeing them thrive and grow is great. And you have to have a trusted partner, especially if you're smaller and again, you don't have the bandwidth or the teams or the experience to be able to do that. But knowing that, as we expand online, it can potentially be an issue, having a partner that you can rely on for that.
So I have a question, and it kind of, I don't want to fall into any data security. But like I was having a conversation with one of my friends. She has an app, and they were talking about identifying a certain pattern with an individual, one of their customers, who was just buying, a lot of stuff every single day and at a very high value. And I would love to hear maybe a suggestion or guidance to a business, because, during this time of COVID-19, we may get excited to see that, oh, there's this big customer and this huge, money is coming in and I'm seeing funds coming in. And I would love to hear maybe advice or suggestions, or maybe, pointing the fingers, I don't know, where you say, you know what, this is actually a red flag. So what would be your take on that? Everybody.
One thing that I've seen, and again, this goes back to some of the reporting and the data, and having thresholds and checks in place. And a boom in business, a spike in business, you're right, Pauline, is an exciting thing. But at the same time, you kind of always have to be thinking, is this too good to be true? And I think the value of having the data is you can have that peace of mind knowing that if this is something linked to fraud, or if it's a fraudster, or whether it's related to velocities or amounts or whatever it might be, seeing a spike, having those checks in place to where, okay, if it's legitimate, and we're just seeing a boom, great. It's it's not going to, we're not going to apply friction. It's not going to be shut down. It's not, we're not going to miss out on that. If it is a fraudster, and one thing that the machine learning will catch are some of these metrics and some of these indicators of, if it's velocity related and there's distances between the shipping and billing address, or the device and the billing address, then we know that is fraudulent. And so again, there's a lot of anxiety that can come with worrying about how your business is going to be impacted, but there's also a lot of peace of mind in understanding and knowing what the technology can do and what the data can do as well.
And to couple on top of that, we have rules, or we call business policies, that we help merchants put into place. And our team, along with First Atlantic, can help those merchants really fine tune, how many orders coming in at once is a red flag. And from, to Dan's point, the shipping address to where the device made the order. So there's a lot of, we can create as many rules as possible to make the merchant feel comfortable. And we can also adjust those as the merchant grows as well.
And it's kind of this constantly evolving machine where we may have an initial rule set, which we have partners and merchants in over 75 unique verticals worldwide, and so we know what works well for certain industries, and that might be a good starting point. But again, every business is different, and so we want to fine tune that specifically to what it is ultimately we're trying to accomplish, what metrics are important. Everybody's looking at chargeback rate, but also the decline rate, the approval rate, and things of that nature. So it isn't just set it and forget it. We'll have it in place, and then there's ongoing monitoring and optimization and constant reconfiguration to make sure that we're adjusting to different use cases or different challenges as they emerge, and having an eye on it constantly.
Chris, do you have any take on that?
Yeah, I think it's the type of business you have as well, in terms of are you selling domestically, are you selling internationally? So there's I think a lot of businesses are now having, especially in the Caribbean, are having their eyes open to well, we can start selling this internationally. Now that we've made the leap domestically, there's a market for this on an international level as well. So and that's where your potential sort of danger level rises, when you're opening this up to, being able to ship goods, to, other countries, which, hard to reclaim those goods, hard to verify who those people are. So that with the business in Bermuda, they went online and they would open up to the world, and, then they're suddenly getting these orders, high orders for a certain type of like perfume. And it was from like South Africa, and and again, it was that initial excitement that so Dan said, great, fantastic, we've just launched our website, and we're already getting international orders for high ticket values, and of course that turned out to be fraud. But that's the pitfalls. But if you, again, going back to the tools, you put the right tools in place to protect yourself, then you can sleep a little better at night, knowing that you can open up your business internationally and sell to the world. But you've got to make sure that you do it in a safe and secure way, basically.
I found the take from Jamie on the policy quite interesting, because in our previous sessions we were talking about forecasting sales and looking at it as a different business plan to your regular brick and mortar. And I think it's all coming together. I'm seeing it now, because I never even thought about it in that way, because you have your website policy when it comes to data, but then you have to have that fraud take on it, which is in itself seems to be a whole other story. So it's so amazing that, you have partners to actually do that, because when you are shifting from that traditional sense of sales, you don't really grasp all the different elements of e-commerce, because you just think, I want to get people's money online. And these are such eye-opening moments for me, and I'm sure the folks out there. So we're just going to close off with, a take from everybody in terms of, if you are now coming into that space of e-commerce, what would be your biggest takeaway that you would want the folks out there to know?
I would probably just say that it can be a little bit daunting. Expanding your business also comes with some potential exposure, and taking some of those risks potentially, but educated risks, right? And making sure that you, one, have the understanding and the expectation of what may potentially come about in terms of fraud challenges. And again, we can't stress it enough, nobody is immune to fraud and fraudsters. And so I think having that expectation and understanding from the onset, but also having the checks in place and the proper protection kind of removes that fear and that hesitancy. And really, if you're looking at expanding and growth, venturing into verticals or geographies where you previously haven't been, a lot of companies just don't go there because they're worried about the amount of fraud or potential fraud and impacts of that. So there's kind of this living in fear and maybe a certain level of growth that you can achieve and can't go beyond that, because either one, you're not willing to take the risks, or two, the risks outweigh the benefits. And so we want to be able to provide the data, provide the insight, remove that fear, and help businesses scale as best and as quickly as they can. So I would say, fraud is sometimes scary, but it doesn't have to be. And there's definitely ways that you can get around it and still scale your business and remove that part of the equation.
Well, I should have gone first.
Payback.
No, but I couldn't agree more. And I like how we've been talking about it as almost an insurance policy. When companies are expanding and growing, you have to have that list of to-dos, and protection and fraud protection has to be on the list. And we want to grow with you, and there are companies out there like us and First Atlantic that can help you. And so, kind of echoing or repeating what I said earlier, having a conversation and really getting educated about it and how it pertains to your specific business needs is essential.
Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I think my overriding message is choose your partners carefully. And that's not just on the payments or anti-fraud side. There's just as if you were a clothing retailer and you're looking at the supplier for your material for whatever you're having made, cheapest is often not the best option. So make sure that you're doing your research, and just because something may cost you a little bit more is probably going to cost you a lot less in the long run.
Great. So if folks have questions for Kount, where do they go? I mean, I put Kount.com in the comments, but if they have any questions, where should they head off to?
I mean, you're welcome to email me directly.
Or they could go into your DMs on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Okay. So
I think my bio is on your
okay, great.
link to this message. Yep.
All right. And what about you, Chris?
So yeah, absolutely. The contact us at fac.pm is a good place, or absolutely DM me directly. So we have a good sort of deep knowledge set of Kount, but when we're dealing with certain either banks or merchants, Jamie and her team's been amazing of jumping on calls with us, just so we can get right into the detail. So we make sure that we can answer everything up front.
Great. Thank you so much, guys, for joining
Thank
us.
you.
It has been eye-opening. I am ready to blog away about what I've learned, and
Awesome.
we will actually be posting this up on YouTube as well. So for folks who are watching this, you will sure to find Jamie and Dan and Chris on LinkedIn on their profile. So thanks, guys.
Thank you guys so
Bye.
much.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.